This week on Full-Time Roundup, absolute chaos in London. The LaLiga race takes an unexpected twist. Bayern cruise into a Klassiker and Inter extend their lead atop Serie A. Plus, MLS loses some big teams early. Full-Time Roundup starts right now. And welcome into another edition of the Full-Time Roundup. I am Matt Gesslin, as always, joined by my good co-host Daniel Brackett here. Daniel, it was an emotional weekend. It was a hard-fought weekend, capped off today by an absolute classic / absolutely wild game in the Premier League. But more importantly, and first of all, how was your weekend? How are we doing? I don't remember you saying that you were going anywhere this weekend, so it sounds like you were in the QC. I'm sure that's a little disappointing to some of our listeners, but what are we feeling on this Monday?
Feeling probably a little bit better than you. I know you needed a lift with this Chelsea game, so glad you were able to get that because it's not fun to kick a dead dog. So glad your team got the victory after probably a pretty brutal Sunday. But yeah, no, I had a good weekend, a lot of rest, so was not traveling like you said, so it was good to save some money and just enjoy the games from the couch. But how are you doing?
Well, it sounds like I'm much better than you were when we were texting yesterday. Of course, I'm not getting out of bed anytime soon. It was what I was told by yourself after a rowdy Saturday. Yes, I had a long drive ahead of me and an eventful game in the USL 1 final, which we'll definitely get to. And we'll give our listeners what the bet ended up being, although I think we had mentioned it being dinner last time. So spoiler alert, there you go. Yeah, but everything else other than that was good. And it was a really hard fought match and great environment. Raleigh showed up hard for NCFC and but all in all, it was a good weekend. Had some fun on Friday and then got to watch some games Saturday and then got to watch, like I said, a great one today. And Daniel, that's where I want to start us off. Premier League just got kind of flipped on its head a little bit this afternoon. Not only did Spurs lose 4-1, and we'll get to the scoreline. I don't think the scoreline is indicative of the game. But more importantly, I think from a Spurs perspective, you have to be a little bit concerned. We don't know the extent of the injuries, but two key players get injured in Van de Ven and James Madison. And then, of course, you have a red card for Romero, who looks like that's going to be a 3-game ban. So you're looking at, arguably 3 of your starters. How does this impact Spurs? And that's what we were concerned about from their perspective. Was everything was smooth sailing up to this point. Clean sheets, winning games, no one hurt, and all of a sudden all that goes to pot in one afternoon or one evening in London.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. The good news is, I guess the good news is Udogie only misses 1 game because it was 2 yellows. Romero will be suspended for 3, which definitely hurts because Eric Dyer isn't the best player in the world. And then once we kind of hear more about the Van de Ven and James Madison injuries, this will kind of define how Spurs are going to kind of rebound from this. But I did text a buddy and I did say, hey, within 20 minutes in this Premier League season, Tottenham might have kind of just lost a lot of momentum here for them to kind of push top 3. And I mean, they've been perfect so far. So this game had a lot of shades of the Liverpool Tottenham game in terms of just like really weird VAR decisions, just kind of hectic all over the place play. And then, Tottenham almost equalized down 2 men. So it was a weird Monday game.
Very strange, absolutely wild fixture. Like you said, from the jump and the red card, obviously that, Spurs score within the first 5 minutes, a great goal. Credit to them. Although a little bit of a lucky deflection off Levi Colwell, which ends up in the back of the net. Not really much of a chance for Robert Sanchez on that one. And then, like you said, the red cards start coming out, and that's when the game changed. And you're looking at, I think it was 12 minutes of stoppage time in the first half and then 9 minutes in the second half. So, all in all, it's a wild game. I think from a Spurs perspective, scoreline, you throw it out the window, right? That's not really something that you expected. You're kind of looking at this and they played well. They still had chances, like you said, at 2-1. Betancourt could have tied it up, and then we go right down the field and score 3-1, and that's kind of game over. So I would say if you're asking me who I think had the better night, I would say still Spurs, which is crazy to sound. But, Chelsea looked really uncertain in the back. You're down to 9 men, and Spurs are still getting quality top A chances against your defense. And not only that, but you go up against Manchester City next week, who scored 6 this past weekend. So that's, to me, a concern. Now, of course, we touched on it already. The concern from a Spurs fan is injuries. If those guys are not healthy for an extended period of time, that's bigger concern long-term. But I think if you're Ange Postecoglou, you look at tonight and say, you know what, we played well. The outcome and the circumstance was out of our control, and it's a weird one. But from my perspective, again, Chelsea needed this win. They move up to 10th. They absolutely had to have it, especially when they went up by 2 men. If they didn't have that and they didn't get the points, it would have been real chaos and real problems and a lot of questions about Mauricio Pochettino. And like I said, they go up against City, who scored 6. And Daniel, they looked to be clearly the title contenders that we expected them to be, and added some pieces that, not really many people had spoken about or weren't too sure how he was going to fit into it. But boy, the Jeremy Doku looked like he fit right in with this Manchester City lineup on Saturday.
Yeah, he's a lightning in a bottle, as you say. And I remember scouting him a year or 2 back, because he was linked with Liverpool to be Mane's replacement at one point or another. And I mean, this kid's unbelievable. And I knew he'd fit right in the Premier League when there was a video when he was at Anderlecht, and he was 16 years old at the time, maybe 17, and it's him versus Vincent Kompany, and he's absolutely standing his ground against Vincent Kompany as a 16, 17-year-old kid who has probably 100 pounds lighter than him. I was like, man, this kid's just an unbelievable athlete, and he like Pep's very robotic teams at times, but he brings an element of just mercurial, like just can do anything at any time and completely break down the low block. And that's exactly what happened. And he ended up getting 4 assists because of it. So not much. I mean, Bournemouth were really bad. So I guess you can't understate that. You can't press City like that. They'll just pick you apart, and like they did. So some of these champion or lower level Premier League teams aren't just pragmatic, and they just are stuck in their ways of how they play. And you're going to see scorelines like this if people or if teams keep it up like this.
Yeah, and you mentioned, just kind of his ability to break that low block, and you have a player like Jack Grealish, who they spent 100 million pounds on as well, who sitting on the bench and watching Doku kind of just dismantle this team and get a goal and 4 assists that you mentioned. So how does he kind of fit into the fold? We know Pep loves to give players that are either in form or doing well in practice the opportunity. So how does Grealish get back in the lineup? Same with Phil Foden, who obviously came off the bench and got a goal. So he got a little bit of playing time. So it's a good problem to be and a good place to be if you're a Manchester City fan. Of course, Kevin De Bruyne was not in the lineup. That would be fantastic. He was in the stadium watching, and it seems like he's getting close to coming back too. So all in all, pretty good time to be atop the table as they are, Manchester City. And one of these months, or as we get closer to the end of the season, they're going to put a run together like they always do. And the question that we've been talking about, Daniel, is whether or not some of these teams can keep it close before City goes on this run. And now that they sit atop the table, it's almost kind of inevitable that they're going to start separating themselves and kind of get away from it. And one of the teams that really was on our mind, and I know is close to your heart, that we've been talking about, is Liverpool, who get a draw at Luton and really kind of, I don't say it ends their title hopes, but like we just talked about, if you're giving City an opportunity to get a little bit of distance on you, makes things a little bit harder to play catch up. And any thoughts on obviously a tough night for your team and a really tough environment? We did say watch out for Luton if you go there, but not to really catch anybody. But they caught somebody. It wasn't 3 points, but it was a big loss of 2 points for Liverpool in this one.
Credit to Luton. They played really well, and their keeper especially had a fantastic game. So sorry, can you hear me? Okay, cool. So they had a great game, and Liverpool just did not finish their chances. And I've spoken with some of my fellow Liverpool fans, and one thing that has concerned me, even though we've been winning pretty well, is we miss a lot of chances. Our conversion rate isn't kind of where it should, and this was kind of the match for it all to see. I mean, Mo Salah has a good header, doesn't get it, but kind of crosses it almost to Darwin, and Darwin just blows it over from 5 yards, which should be a tap in. And we've seen him do that a couple times now. He's still a fantastic player, and I'm not worried about him at all. But these are kind of the matches that you look back when City wins the league and kind of kicking yourself a little bit. So pretty bummed. Glad we responded with the late goal by Luis Diaz. And I mean, that's what football is all about after what he's been through to get that goal and, pull up the shirt and not get fined for that. So credit to Premier League for doing that. And, we go again midweek, and I'm sure there's going to be a pretty big response from Liverpool in the next couple games.
Yeah, you mentioned that midweek. We'll touch on that as we get later in the show with Europa and Champions League coming back. And of course, two teams, Daniel, that play in the Champions League this week as well if we thought today was crazy, there was a game on Saturday that kind of had some chaos in it as well. Of course, we're talking about Arsenal and Newcastle and the whole debacle with Anthony Gordon's goal and whether that was a goal. Of course, Arteta coming out and saying it's a disgrace, an embarrassment. You could put any adjective you want in there. What was your take on this one? And honestly, up until that point, it was a fun watch as a neutral, back and forth, up and down the pitch, and both teams had their chance. And then, of course, some have said it was a foul, some have said it wasn't a foul, but there was obviously more at stake and more that played into that. What the offsides and out about. Just what was your thought on the whole situation that led to Arsenal losing 3 points on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think being the biggest league in the world that they'd kind of have something to solve knowing if the ball went out of play, as well as the offside rule can be pretty sketchy with drawing lines. So if we're going to use this technology, we got to use the full capacity of it. But I kind of like Newcastle in this game just because they're at home, and Arsenal haven't been completely convincing. But it was a hard fought, scrappy Newcastle win. Eddie Howe has got the boys believing for sure. And, these managers and these players make such a big deal out of these things, because when you have a team like Manchester City that you have to chase, you have to be perfect. And that's why I feel like you're seeing more and more coaches rant and rave about things, because every single point matters when you have a near perfect side like Manchester City. So that's I feel like that's the perspective I took on this game. And, Arsenal probably will be a little upset that they didn't get at least a point here, but at the end of the day, that's football.
Yeah, I have an interesting take on it. I think, and it has nothing to do with Arteta, who I've said on this pod before, I'm not a huge fan of, not necessarily his coaching, but just his antics and personality and the way he approaches things. I think there's something that's being overshadowed a little bit. And that's just kind of the antics around it all, right? If something doesn't go your way, we've seen it with Klopp and we've seen it with Pep and his testiness with the reporters in the past. And there's something to it, right? And I think bigger context too, we're losing sight of things as an institution in different levels. And these guys, these refs, the VAR is a different story. Of course, if you look at actually the data and the stats of VAR, it's getting a lot of calls right. It's getting a lot of the big calls right. If you look at what happened in the FA Cup or EFL Cup this past weekend, where there was no VAR, and some of the calls there that would have changed to had VAR been in place. So I think what I'm getting at is that we have to look and make sure that we're understanding that the referees are there to ref the game, the rules of the game. They're not there for one team to dominate or to make calls on behalf of one team or the other. They're making calls, and let's take aside whether or not they're consistent or they're making the right calls all the time. They're human, and there's always been a human element of refereeing. Before VAR, there's always that element as well. And I think that's something that I think a lot of these managers are losing sight of, is that they're there to rule the ref. Or the refs are there to rule the way the game is written and the laws of the game. And that's all it comes down to. Now, you can agree whether or not the technology is there or the technology is not there. That's a different story. The way that they've seen the game play and the way that they're judging and calling it is the way that they think that the law should be interpreted. That's it. End of story. Move on. I'm sorry that that's the case. And you know what? Arteta, if you guys had scored 2 goals, it wouldn't have mattered. So, there's a little bit of both in that. And I think, like I said, it's easy for these guys to go out there at the podium and say their piece and say, well, this is a disgrace or whatever. But in reality, that's the rules of the game. Had he been playing at that time and something happened, okay, that's game, move on. And that's it. But we're in a different place now, I think, holistically as a society, and that's a different story altogether, different conversation. But I think it plays into some of these calls and the way that these refs are being treated. And I honestly think it's not appropriate. I think that, technology, yes, if we're going to do VAR and we're going to do technology, do it right. We've seen it with the Europa and UEFA with the way that they have the lines called, and that technology should absolutely be implemented in the Premier League. And let's be honest, though, the Premier League said we don't want it. Whether that was the owners or that was the managers or a combination of both, they didn't want that system where you could instantly have the ball called out if it's out, and same with offside where that technology is in play. So everyone needs to just shut up, play the game, and you know what? Let the play on the field rule itself. That's harder than it sounds, but because when it happens to your team, you want to go up in uproar and say, this is bullshit, but that's everything. Everyone happens. It happens to every team. And no one's singling you out. So
Yeah.
I think that everyone needs to remember that as well. So
we see it in all sports too. So it's not
exactly.
just soccer. So I mean, let the refs ref the game, focus on what you can affect and change and get a result if you can. And at the end of the day, this is football. We've seen the hand of God a long time ago, but that affected the World Cup, and
right.
It fucking happened. So who cares now? Nothing's going to change that. So
exactly.
Just to quickly hit on, Forest beat Villa 2-0. So Villa kind of lose some steam here and get in top 5. But I just wanted to, quick 10 seconds, just a round of applause. Congratulations. Sheffield get their first win of the year. And I honest to God thought this might actually never happen. Whoever, it was Wolves this time, but if you lose to Sheffield, you should get like negative points for that. Honestly, at the end of the day, that's just embarrassing. But just wanted to give Sheffield a shout out. We've kind of shit on them all year. So congratulations on your first win.
1 win, got to add it, got to have 1. So congrats to them. Maybe they get a couple more points now, as we saw with Luton when they got their first result. Tough. Just a side note, as we mentioned, Spurs in the top half of the show. They have to go to Molineux this week, which will be, as we all know, is a tough place to go play, especially after losing to a team like Sheffield with some injuries.
Oh, yeah.
So just keep an eye out for that one as well. But another team that continues to struggle, Daniel, is Burnley. And we've touched on them a little bit. What is going to happen with this team? They just continue to put in poor performances, and they lose 2-0 to Crystal Palace. The question I sort of haphazardly ask you, because I know the answer, is can Burnley sack Vincent Kompany at this point, or do they kind of let the cards roll and be where they are, given that it was kind of expected they weren't going to stay up? But do you kind of ride the course, or do you make a change here?
So you have 2 options. And so I'll bring kind of the holistic approach to this conversation. So there's 4 teams with around either 6 points or less, and there's a 5-point gap. So unless, Everton or someone else is thrown into the mix here, 3 of these 4 teams are going to get relegated. So number 1, you ask yourself, all right, if we sack Kompany here, do we think we can survive? If that question is yes, then you do it. But if you think, hey, the squad's not up to snuff, we don't want to spend any more money in January, but Kompany did such a good job in the championship, we're going to stick with our guy. This is a long-term vision, long-term plan. Then you stick with them. And maybe you have that conversation with Kompany. Listen, I get you want to commit to this style of football, but can we try to mix it up a little bit to be more pragmatic? But it's all about those internal conversations, and that's kind of where I'm at with those.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I don't think you sack him. I think we've been hearing that he's going to be the next Pep Guardiola, the next manager of Manchester City in the future, and all these rumors. And of course, this was very early, and so you have a chance to have a guy like that on your staff, and you don't want to lose it. If you're me and my perspective for Burnley, to your point though, they got to stay up, and I think if they can beat out the teams like a Luton or Bournemouth or Sheffield, which are very doable, all four teams are very, very poor. I think that, you take the risk and you maybe change your style. I like the idea of maybe talking to them a little bit and saying, hey, we understand this is what we got here with, but that's not going to fly at this level. So I don't think you sack them. I think if you continue to, if you move down the table as we get closer and you're really looking at, bottom and Sheffield level, maybe you have that conversation, but I think they're okay for now. I think you're not going to change who's going to come in at this point anyway. You got to wait for Sean Dyche to get fired, maybe at Everton, and then have him come and save you. So, but one team, and we mentioned just briefly, and we can get into the relegation battle as we get closer towards the end of the season. But moving into another league where there is no doubt of who the manager is for this squad, Daniel. Thomas Tuchel and Bayern Munich absolutely put the pedal to the metal against Dortmund and just blew them out of the water. It started early and it continued all the way through a 4-0 win. This wasn't even a matchup at some point. It looked like a class of David versus Goliath, and that's surprising to me.
Absolutely, and kind of carrying with your little analogy here, Dortmund are on their highway to hell because that was a brutal loss. When you could see 3 minutes into the game off a corner, that's just not how you start a game. That's how you beat yourself. And we had a follower of the show, Ewan. He does Charlotte FC content with Crowncast. He tweeted, and I couldn't agree more. So Bayern aren't that good this year. This is just showing how bad Dortmund are. And we've seen Dortmund play well in big games and struggle in mid-tier opponents, but they completely rolled over. And it just was a shame to see. And, it's kind of looking like, Dortmund still can get top four, but it's going to be the same old Bundesliga. We get excited every year that maybe someone will knock Bayern off their perch, but it doesn't happen. But we'll see. And I was pretty disappointed. I thought it was going to be more back and forth, and I was pretty disappointed and let down by this match.
Yeah, we've talked about it, how the results were not indicative of the play that Dortmund was putting on the field. They do get, they were undefeated going into this one, but they never really stood out like they were going to kind of compete here. And of course, Bayern Munich losing in the cup on Wednesday was not helpful. They got their full attention as well, especially given all the politics and the news and the papers around that loss. And so you knew Bayern was going to come ready to go. And unfortunately, Terzic just does not have his guys ready. And you mentioned Upamecano scoring in the 3rd minute, and they went off on their way from there. And it is tough to say. I was looking forward to RB Leipzig potentially challenging, and they shockingly lose to Mainz on the weekend as well. And so who's going to really compete with Bayern? I think the only team that we can talk about, Daniel, which we're all both very high on, is your Bayer Leverkusen, who continue to win. They beat Hoffenheim, and they're for real. And I think you're looking at a real 2-horse race here in the Bundesliga. Now, of course, the matchup that's going to be the decider, if all things continue on the path it's going, is going to be that matchup in Leverkusen later in the season when Bayern goes on the return leg after a draw at the Allianz Arena. And how is Xavi going to be able to slay Goliath, I guess, is the question, to use that reference twice in a matter of 5 minutes.
I hope so. And the way Leverkusen are just doing it is they're not even winning ugly. They're just winning in such a beautiful fashion here. And we talk about them a lot because they're the kind of darlings of the Bundesliga right now. But the outside backs are the ones that are making the difference with Xavi ball. And Grimaldo had 2 goals this week, but he's had 5 goals, 3 assists already. And Frimpong has had 3 goals and 5 assists. These are outside backs, wing backs more you're talking about. But when you're getting that production and then you have a Florian Wirtz, Boniface, Hoffman, and then guys off the bench like Horslek and Adley. And Patrick Schick hasn't even played a game yet. That's the scary part. I really do think they can go the distance. And I'm just kind of in love with how they play.
It will be interesting. Of course, they're battling on two fronts, three fronts actually. They're still in Polka Cup as well, so as well as Europa, where we've talked about them being the darling of that tournament and probably going to, along with Liverpool, be the favorites there. So it is going to be interesting. Of course, they do separate themselves, like I mentioned. It's really a two-horse race. Bayern Munich and Leverkusen now a 5-point cushion from Stuttgart, who again dropped points. I say that again, Daniel. This is the story now. Formerly second place team, they lose Garassi and they start to kind of falter a little bit. I don't think any of us really expected them to go the whole distance, but now sitting third and like I said, a surprise loss on the weekend. And then of course, the continued fall of a team that we've been talking about, pretty regularly on the show is Union Berlin, just to wrap around the Bundesliga quickly. And they're now currently 16th after a really tough loss to Eintracht Frankfurt 3-0 on the weekend. And they have Champions League this week too. So things are really looking dire for Union Berlin, who we thought was going to be a nice story and continue that story, but it looks like that may be all she wrote for Union Berlin. But to continue another good story, because I don't want to have us down on a sour note, there is a team that is surprising, and we are now pretty far along into a season where you almost think they're going to be for real, Daniel, and that's in La Liga, who after Madrid dropped points this past weekend, surprisingly, you are looking at Girona, who are atop the table in La Liga after 11 weeks. You've been high on this. I know you brought this story to my attention early in the season and thought I dismissed it. But again, 12 weeks now. They are atop the table, 2 points clear of Real Madrid. What are your takes on Girona at this point?
They're another fun team to watch, and they're very they're not always like dominant either. So they've gone down multiple times this year, even down 2 goals, and have come back and won the game like 4-2. That's what happened this week, and it's very interesting, and obviously they can't keep doing that. Like, that's not sustainable, but they are free flowing. And they got a great squad. The squad they built was very charismatically and just kind of picked pieces here and there. 10-1-1, like you said, second best goal differential, mostly because they score just so many goals. Dubovnik, the striker, Ukrainian 26-year-old, has 6 goals and 4 assists already. He's been phenomenal. You got Savio on the wing. And then you got, a couple of Barca rejects who have been kind of really stepping up the game. And you even got Daley Blind, who couldn't even believe he's still playing football at this point. I mean, he just feels so old, but it's a great story, and I'm here for it. I'd love someone else other than, the usual Athletic Madrid, Real Madrid, Barcelona to kind of challenge. And I'm just hoping they can keep this run going for sure.
And you mentioned those 3 big squads, and I want to get to them in a second here, but also want to touch quickly on Daniel. We at the beginning of the season, we mentioned who we thought was going to round out the top 4 in La Liga. Both of our 2 teams are battling it out right now in 5th and 6th, which is Athletic Club, who you had as 4th, and Real Betis, who I had as 4th. And my question to you is Girona going to slip enough that either one of those teams gets in, or are we really looking at our top 4 right now as it stands with 12 games in, a long way to go? But are you confident that Girona will take one of those top 4 spots away from either one of those 2 squads that we picked out early in the season?
That's tough. I just don't think how they are playing, they can keep sustaining. I mean, 10-1-1 is an absurd record. I think top 5, but 4 is asking them a lot. They still got to play the big boys, and Real Madrid humbled them, so they still got to play Barca, Athletic Madrid, and everyone around them. So it's going to be up to those games to see if they're really about it or not. But I still like them to kind of maintain that top 5, top 6 status for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think their points separation gives them an advantage, right? They're about 11 points clear of those 2 teams. So, we'll see what happens, but I think that they're up there for a while. It'll be interesting to see now a team that like I said, I want to touch on the three big boys in La Liga and just kind of one victor, one draw, and a surprising loss out of that group. Real Madrid, as we mentioned, dropped points to Rayo Vallecano, which was surprising. And then Barca edge out a win against Real Sociedad and Atleti lose to Cadiz. I'll let you take the floor and take us where we're going on this one, but those are three pretty interesting and surprising results all around.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Madrid because we've mentioned this before at Real Madrid too, just to specify. And you kind of seen what I've said maybe in the past a little bit kind of come to fruition here, that they just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. And they finally were not bailed out by Jude Bellingham. And Vinny Jr. has yet to step up. Rodrigo has not been good. Joselu's kind of hot and cold. And you need these three players to step up because Jude just cannot keep sustaining what he's been doing. Even though he might be one of the best, if not the best player in the world, he needs these guys to step up. And Ancelotti's kind of got to maybe put a foot up there the other attacker's ass a little bit. Hey, like, it's time for you guys to start producing here and score some goals. So it's going to be interesting how Ancelotti kind of manages that. But Real Madrid have kind of been just being carried by Jude, and I'm not sold on them yet. And I think the La Liga is still very wide open based off this. But maybe if they address it a little bit in January, they can kind of fortify the league. But I'm just still not convinced with them yet.
It will be interesting to see what kind of moves they make. Of course, they are rumored to be the front runner, if not let's call it a lock for Mbappe in the summer, as a lot of people are donning it. So it will be interesting. I think, to your point, and I completely agree with you. I mentioned it earlier in the year as well, that they need a number 9. They're missing that once Benzema left, and Jude was only able to fill so much. And of course, that covers up a lot of cracks when he delivers, but he's not going to be able to deliver week in, week out, especially 20 years old, and one of the best teams in one of the toughest leagues in the world. So it's going to be an interesting one. Now, another team that's looking for some goal scorers, Daniel, that's Barcelona. Surprisingly, they looked really raw and really had a rough match on Saturday against Real Sociedad, who we've talked about as a really good squad, Champions League squad. And they gave Barcelona everything they could ask for. Ter Stegen kept Barcelona in it for basically the entire match. And then an absolute worldie of a ball from Gundogan to Rahu, basically in the 90th minute, to give them to steal. Let's say what it was. They stole 3 points from Real Sociedad on this one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Especially the first 20 minutes were all Real Sociedad, and it was looking pretty dire. Both teams had good chances. Still yet to see, Robert Lewandowski and Rafinha and those players coming back to injury kind of establish themselves. Now, you did see Pedri make his first appearance. I think this is his first appearance since the injury, so that's going to be huge for them in the future. And I'm sure he'll get minutes midweek to kind of maintain that fitness. But Xavi's got some work to do with this team. João Felix came on the scene hot, but it's kind of simmered off since then. So he needs to get their strikers firing, and that's what they have not been doing. Lewandowski's struggled this year. Ferran Torres has been hot and cold. So you'd like to see Barca not have to rely on the youngsters as much, like Lamine Yamal and Gavi and all them, and have those experienced players step up a little bit. So I'm still bullish on how Barca is going to be, especially that they survived the injury crisis. But this is why they pay Xavi the big bucks, and he needs to get them firing again.
Yeah, you mentioned firing and goal scoring. Of course, between those three big teams, only one goal scored, which we mentioned, Barcelona getting the goal and Madrid losing to Las Palmas 2-0, surprising there as well. Of course, they still have a game in hand on everybody, but they're now sitting in 6 points, out from first and 4 points from Real Madrid. So an interesting one there as well. 2-1. They did get a goal on that one. So 2 goals scored between the three big boys against really lackluster, opponents. They were my pick. They were cruising, Daniel. They were looking great. Antoine Griezmann was just putting balls in the back of the net and making guys look like world-class players, and he's kind of slowed down a little bit. And I still stand by it. I think Diego Simeone knows what he's doing. And, of course, they took out Real Madrid earlier in the Madrid derby, and they get Barcelona soon. And So we'll see what happens there. But it's an interesting race in La Liga at this point.
I do want to mention something that's just absolutely absurd. And I was just looking at the match on Friday between Madrid and Las Palmas, and I happened to notice that Las Palmas are in 10th place, which is pretty good for them. They're 5-2-5, which is not a great record, but their goal difference is -1. They've scored 10 goals and conceded 11 goals after 12 games. I mean, that's absurd. I don't think I've seen that before. They just park the bus, keep it tight, and then they'll go and nick one at the end. So I just thought, I mean, they've won 4 out of their last 5 with 10 goals in 12 games. I mean, I don't know how that works, but that's just incredible.
Yeah, and keep in mind they are newly promoted side as well, so doing a hell of a job.
Mourinho needs to go there. That's like a Mourinho dream right there.
Agreed. Well, he's doing okay at Roma for now. We'll get to that in a second. And great transition into Serie A, where Inter, Daniel, go and they get a big 3 points against Atalanta and now sit 2 points clear. It's kind of their league at this point, I would imagine. We all agree. I know we've talked about Juve a little bit, but they win ugly against Fiorentina this weekend. But AC Milan dropping more points against Udinese, and this is Inter's league, is it not?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they're firing on all cylinders. I mean, that there was a ball that set up the PK to win it. Kalahanglu he's such a good striker of the ball, and he had one of the nicer passes I've seen this weekend. It was one of those where you're just watching and you inaudibly say something. You're like, oh, because of how good the pass was. Inter are the team to beat. They look great. And pending any injury crisis, I think they will go and win this Serie A pretty convincingly, which is a shame. But hey, they're a legit team. I've been an Inzaghi doubter at times, and he's completely proven me wrong this and last year going to the Champions League final. But yeah, I've been very impressed with how they play, and their recruitment's been very smart and frugal, and I've been really impressed. And then to kind of pivot over, Juve, I don't know how they do it. They keep winning. They keep winning by 1 goal, and they're getting healthy, and that's the scary part. So maybe they will eventually choose not to win ugly, but you never know with Allegri.
Yeah, and don't want to spend too much time on Allegri ball. It really pains me to watch. But, to kind of take it to the other Milan team, of course, AC Milan, who continue to struggle. We'll touch on them later on in the show as well when we preview Champions League a little bit. But Pioli's having a tough time right now, Daniel, and it's not looking pretty, and you wonder what's going to happen there. Of course, a lot can play for in the Champions League if they can advance into the knockout stages and see what happens. But no wins in their last 4. They currently sit 6 points back. And you got to watch out because Napoli are winning consistently again, and they're right behind them in 4th. So, don't want to spend too much time here, especially with Milan kind of stepping away and kind of losing ground. And but we touched on Atalanta, who lost and sit 5th, Bologna, who sits 6th. And I know there are some stories in here that you wanted to touch on briefly, especially with a 41-year-old young manager who's starting to kind of take shape here a little bit.
Absolutely. And if you told me Bologna were going to be 6th at this point, I would have probably called you crazy. They're not exactly one of those teams that is very well known or very popular in Serie A, but the ex-player Thiago Motta, you probably, Matt, remember him from his days at PSG as the maestro in that Laurent Blanc team with Ibrahimovic and Cavani and all them. But another very brilliant mind, and you kind of knew like him and the likes of Pirlo and Xabi Alonso. Those like deep holding midfielders, a lot of them become coaches. We're seeing that a lot too. The new and upcoming managers like Xavi and all them as well. We're all center defensive, center mids, which is very interesting trend that I'm seeing. But they play really good ball. They beat Lazio on Friday, and they've done great business. They signed Xerxes, who I've mentioned before, Lewis Ferguson, Salamakers from AC Milan, and then they went in and got Carlson from AZ Alkmaar, who hasn't hit the ground running yet, but I'm sure Thiago Motta is gonna get the best out of him. So I just wanted to shout out how good Bologna have been. And then you mentioned Roma with the late goals, 2 in extra time. Finally got to see Serdar Azmoun do something since his move from Leverkusen. And Roma, they find a way to win sometimes.
They do. We were talking earlier on about Jose Mourinho potentially getting sacked, and now they sit 7th in the table and look really good in Europa League as well. And Jose's kind of ridden the ship. I think maybe that speech about just playing with what they had a couple weeks ago and kind of taking some of that pressure off his team, and they're starting to move up the table. And you never, like I said, keep an eye out for Jose Mourinho's teams, especially in tournaments. And you never know what you're going to get there. But moving into the rest of the world, Daniel, there was some interesting matchups across France and across Eredivisie, as well as some Portuguese news. But the big one for us, and we not too much of a shocker, we both called Nice winning this one against Rennes. They win convincingly, and then of course PSG crush Montpellier. Zaire Emery continues to just flourish and show off. But it's an interesting time, and can PSG continue to keep pace with Nice? Of course, I think we both agree, but how long is this going to last for Nice is the question.
I don't see it lasting very much longer, but they just keep winning. So it's kind of hard to say. And PSG are kind of starting to hit form here and firing on all cylinders. Warren Zaire Emery has, I think, 6 goal contributions in the last 5. And just real quick, something funny is it's a very tight at the top. Nice are at 25 points, PSG at 24, and Monaco at 23. So as close as you can get. Ligue 1 is kind of looking a little bit more interesting than Bundesliga, and both call them Farmers League, but I'm kind of liking the competitiveness in Ligue 1.
It is known as the Farmers League, yes, and one other league that might be considered Farmers League, and we're not diminishing any of the leagues. That's why they kind of sit in this rest of the world category for us is Eredivisie, and we've touched on Ajax and their struggles a lot as well, but they do get round of applause for them as well as we did for Sheffield. 2 wins in a row. 2 wins in a row, Daniel. They have a big matchup this weekend, or not this weekend, on Thursday in Europa as well. So they're kind of on a potential little winning streak, as they say. Maybe they're turning things around there after a dismal start. PSV, of course, get the W as well in their match and sit atop the table in Eredivisie. And then a nice tight battle. You mentioned kind of Ligue 1 becoming a little tight. We also have a tight battle in the Portuguese league. Benfica, Sporting, and Porto, of course, the 3 teams that you would associate with that league, all really tight at the top, and going to be an interesting battle. And of course, Benfica struggling at the Champions League level, but Porto look to probably advance from their group, and it's an interesting time in the Portuguese league as well. But as we transition, just kind of want to make sure that we give our listeners an opportunity to engage with us. And again, follow us on X at Fulltime Roundup. You can follow Daniel at Liverpool CLTFC. You can follow myself at M Gesslin. Please download and like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating. It goes a long way to spreading the brand, as Daniel likes to say. Now, one other thing that we want to touch on is we've been adding leagues here and there, and we want to touch on MLS, who, Daniel, are now almost through the second match rounds. Let's not call it the rounds. Let's call it the second. Yes, exactly. But they're second fixtures of the series. So now we got it because it's very confusing. Why would we make this very easy for everybody? Sporting KC does knock off St. Louis. Daniel, I was not surprised by this. I told you I thought this was going to happen. Sporting KC, one of the perennial powers in MLS, and St. Louis, a great story. Expansion squad this year, number 1 seed in the West, but they get tossed. Dallas do tie it up in their series. Of course, Cincinnati, which we expected the top seed in the East, absolutely destroy New York Red Bulls, which is music to my ears in penalties. And then LAFC wraps up their series against Vancouver. Anything that you want to touch on in MLS, or like we said, maybe wait till we get to the knockout when it gets interesting.
MLS is just such a wild league. LAFC, I don't know if you watched that. They called a goal back because the referee literally body checked a player when Vancouver was about to shoot on top of the box. And then I'm not familiar with the Vancouver coach, but he had a shirt that says like I am Vancouver or something of that nature. And he was just going fucking ape shit on the sideline. Got a red card too. And just him getting sent off with the graphic of that shirt was one of the more funniest things I've ever seen. It was just MLS after dark, as Tom Bogert likes to say. And I was absolutely here for it. Now, kind of to pivot to another soccer league, it was very quiet in our chat between me and Matt yesterday as NCFC beat Independence and PKs. And I know Matt is a gigantic Independence fan, so I wanted to give him a nice 24 hours to do whatever he needed to do before we spoke on it. But it was a pretty good final. Like you said, Raleigh showed out, and it was a great atmosphere. They got a great soccer park out there that I actually used to train at quite a bit, and been to a ton of games growing up. And that side of Raleigh, Cary, was kind of where I grew up. So happy that my boyhood club kind of clinched this, no matter how it happened. And do you kind of want to give a little insight, a little 24 hours post react to this game?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic match. Final you could ask for. Both teams expansive and a lot of chances on both sides. And then of course you get 0-0 in regulation, go to extra time. Independence go up in the first half of extra time on a header by Hector Acosta, which was great off a corner, and places going, well, your side of the field's going quiet. Our side was going pretty nuts. Shout out to all the ultras and mech reserves who went up there and filled 2 buses worth and really showed out and made a lot of noise. And then you guys get a late, I think 113th minute equalizer, which really got the place rocking. Almost got a winner actually after that. You guys just had the momentum going into PKs, and a really painful way to lose any kind of final. No one wants to see finals go down to PKs, but that's just the way it is sometimes. And 5-4 in PKs. You guys didn't miss one. We missed one, and that's the game. But again, like you said, great atmosphere, great we great facility on grass, which is rare, and just the way that the boys played from my perspective, we were extremely proud of them as a club, as a city. And there's big things to come from Charlotte Independence. Of course, NCFC will move up to USL Championship next year, so they're no longer in League One. It's not a promotion relegation. It was already announced they were moving up, but Independence will be a force to be reckoned with next year. And again, shout out to those guys. Keep your heads up, guys. It's you did us proud, and we're excited to back you guys for next year into the future too. So, Daniel, I know we covered a extensive amount of football there. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of the break, though, we're going to do our players of the week. And then we're going to give you an absolutely quick preview of UCL and Europa League matchups. And Daniel will give you some of his bets going into those matchups as well. So we'll be right back. And welcome back to the Full-Time Roundup. I mentioned UCLA. We are not talking about college basketball yet. We are talking about the Europa Champions League, Daniel. And a quick little preview for some of the matchups that we have here this week. Some good ones, some tasty ones. As we mentioned last time, these are the reverse fixtures of the previous match, just at the different arena from the previous matchup. That's a little confusing of way of saying it's a home and home for those of you who know that is. So if your team was on the home side, they are now the away side and vice versa. But Daniel, the big ones that we want to touch on are, of course, Group F. Group of Death is still wide open. They have the return fixture. So Dortmund will be hosting Newcastle this time around. Any thoughts here? Of course, 2 sides of the coin going into this one on a high and one on an absolute, low at this point.
I lean Newcastle just because they lost at home to Dortmund and Dortmund just got bumped. But this could be a perfect get-right game for Dortmund at the same time. So I'm going to go like a 1-1 draw.
I think that's a great result. I think Newcastle will be thrilled with that. I'll take that same 1-1 draw. Flip side of that group, of course, is AC Milan, who we touched about earlier. Can they get the big one against PSG? I know this is a question that you've had, so I'm going to let you answer it. Does AC Milan get the result they need at home against PSG?
No, I think PSG honestly kind of roll over AC Milan here. Probably 3-1 is what I'd say. It really depends on if Pulisic is going to be back for this one because they look pretty toothless without him. Pioli's got to get the best out of Rafa Leao as well, which he has kind of failed to do this season. But yeah, no, I'm gonna lean hard with PSG.
Could be tough times for Piola after this one if that's the case. So keep an eye out for that. I don't think anything happens right away, but they've been struggling. If it's a big blowout at home, could be some news to look out for. Another one we want to talk on is Atleti, who just lost, like we talked about earlier in the top half. They placed Celtic, who somehow drew a result out of them. No Rodrigo de Paul, of course, too, with the red card. Does Celtic continue this, or does Atleti right the ship here?
Atleti kills Celtic here. They shouldn't even been a match at Celtic. They have plenty of guys like Wilmar Barrio, or I think it's Wilmar Barrios, and a couple other youngsters who can step up. Marcus Llorente is a great player who hasn't played that much. So I think Athletic get it done very comfortably here. Celtic might get one late, but I'm going to say like a 3-4-1.
One that we want to touch on just quickly, and they're clear. They're going to advance. They're going to make the group stage or knockout stage as Barcelona. But my question to you, Daniel, is does Xavi play his starters, or does he give them some rest for La Liga? I know there's some players that he probably wants to give some time just to get back in form, but does he play the full starting lineup here for this one after they are perfect in the group stage?
A little bit of both. I think like Pedri will get a start. De Jong will get a start. Lewandowski, Rafinha, because he's got to get those guys kind of firing, and this is a perfect game to get the confidence up against a pretty lowly Shakhtar. It's also played in Poland, so there's not really no way atmosphere, or there's not really a home game either. So I'm pretty confident Barca are going to mix it up a little bit. I don't think like João Cancelo will start. I think someone will slide in it right back for him. But kind of mixed lineup here, and rest of the guys who have been kind of carrying the load for majority of the season while people have been healthy. So I think Barca dismantle Shakhtar a little bit here as well.
Couldn't disagree with you more. I think that's going to be, I couldn't agree with you more. Excuse me. That's what I meant to say. Now, stop me if you've heard this before, Daniel. We're 40 minutes into the show, and we've yet to talk about Manchester United, who did win on the weekend, but it was a lowly performance. And now they have a tough task of going to Copenhagen, who've been tough at home. Can Manchester United get the W? And also, if they do, how important is it for Erik ten Hag that he gets 2 wins in a row at this point in the season?
Yeah, this is the perfect time to grab a result here. I do think they'll get the win. They still can play like shit all they want. They'll somehow win like 1 or 2-0, not convincingly. But hey, like we always say, winning cures all. A win's a win, 3 points, and it could be huge for how that group's going to shake out.
Yeah, I completely. I mean, they have to get this win. It's have to get it. There's nothing else you need to say about it. Switching gears quickly before we get into our players of the week and then Daniel's best bets on these Europa night games, European night games, is Europa. Daniel, we mentioned Ajax. They need a win against Brighton. Do they get this win against Brighton on Thursday?
No, I don't think so. They might get a draw though. I feel like a draw is not out of the question. Brighton have been kind of a yo-yo as of late, so I'm sure De Zerbi is going to want to win pretty badly. But this, I'm going to say like a 2-2 draw.
Keeps both teams in the group, to be honest, too. So I agree with that. Another one at Atalanta. Can they bounce back after this weekend?
Yeah, no, I think they will. They're a great side. They kept it close with Inter, which I was impressed with. They kind of passed the eye test there, so I think Atalanta will go on and win this group anyways.
Yeah, tough to say that they played poorly when they lost 2-1 against the league leader. So I agree with you. I think they roll through. West Ham could really use a performance, Daniel. They lost again this past weekend in Premier League and been struggling a little bit. Can David Moyes get them on track again at home? This is a big one at home.
Yeah, I think so. Just because the at-home aspect, we almost had a classic Matt Cooler moment when he said West Ham are in free fall, and then they go on and score 2 consecutive goals. Ended up losing the match, so Matt ended up coming off okay, but I was poking a little fun at him after that conversation. But yeah, I do think West Ham get it done.
He was going to start a tally, and I think for those of you that don't know, it's a real thing. He finally starting to realize it's a real thing. But we'll definitely cover those matches on Thursday's episode as well when we break down these games, as well as give you some predictions for the weekend. But Daniel, one of our favorite segments is always the case, is our players of the week. Want to touch on those real quick. And I'm happy to take us through our goalkeepers and defenders, and then you can take us through our midfield and attackers. Of course, again, we do a 3-4-3 for those that are new to the show, just to give a little bit more of the stats. But there are times when players don't have the best stats and they dominated or showed up on the sheet, and we give them some flowers as well. But for me, I think both of us, again, we do this together. Ter Stegen was our goalkeeper in the back, kept Barcelona in it. Of course, they get the clean sheet, an easy one for us. In the back, Grimaldo, again, 2 goals, and this guy just continues to score goals, mainly free kicks, but some fantastic goals as well. And they're just brilliant finishes. Upamecano, again, we touched on it for Bayern Munich, gets the opener with a header off the corner. And then Ronald Araujo for Barcelona steals the 3 points against Real Sociedad. So three defenders with goals this week.
Yeah, love to see it. And for the midfield, we got Sunset, 2 assists for Athletic Club. He's a 23-year-old Spanish midfielder. Definitely keep an eye on him. He's a fantastic player. Florian Wirtz with a goal. He's just in dazzling form, as we've mentioned multiple times. Alexander Golovin, the Russian international from Monaco, he's kind of the fulcrum of that squad, and he needs to produce if they're going to keep winning. So with a goal and assist there. And then a polarizing player, Bruno Fernandes for Manchester United. At the end of the day, the captain stepped up and got a much needed goal here to give Man United 3 points.
He stepped up for the gaffer. He stepped up
for the gaffer. Yes, that is true. And for attack, we got Nico Jackson, a hat trick. There's been questions if he can be the guy at Chelsea, and scoring a hat trick definitely helps and eases that talk.
Even with an asterisk on that one.
Even with an asterisk. But Chuba Akpom, 2 goals off the bench for Ajax. He was kind of the big signing that was supposed to spur Ajax on. Scored a shit ton of goals in the championship from Borough last year, and he's finally got his 2 goals. So good for him to bounce back. And then Dubovnik, 1 goal, 2 assists for Girona, the Ukrainian striker. For player of the week, I had Harry Kane. Kind of hard to leave him out when he scores a hat trick in the Klassiker. How about you, Matt?
Player we mentioned earlier in the episode, Jeremy Doku, goal, 4 assists. Yeah, anytime someone has 4 assists, it's automatic. So add the goal on top of that. Can't really go wrong there. Young player of the week for me was Florian Wirtz, who again continues to get on the score sheet with a goal in their win and Bayer Leverkusen's win. And I know you had a repeat performance for your young player of the week, but boy, has this kid been fantastic.
Yeah, Warren Zaire-Emery, his goal was fantastic. I mean, that back heel from Dembele was great, but he had the composure just to absolute rifle it. Top bins. He's just in a vein of form now, and wouldn't be surprised if he scores against Milan or assists.
Wouldn't put it past him, that's for sure. And taking us into that nice segue for Champions League, you mentioned PSG versus AC Milan. Generally, we will have Thursday be our intro to the betting week. But of course, with Champions League and Europa League midweek, we want to give you some bets going into those. So Daniel will take us through just those games. We will preview and give you the bets for the domestic league on Thursday's show. So please listen in for that. But Daniel, take us home with some bets for the listeners and who are going to watch some Champions League and Europa League midweek.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And just to preface this, we had a profitable weekend, 3-2 best bets, and we lost the parlay, but still up a unit, up 27.25 units all time. So first for the parlay of the week, and I'll update the recap of the record for Thursday, but the parlay is PSG money line, which honestly, full disclosure, I would take straight up. It's pretty juicy. Atletico Madrid, Liverpool, Barca, Napoli. Did not have the chance to calculate this because my book just came out with the lines, but those are the 5 that I loved, and I'll have if it hits or not, I'll have what the odds were. Best bets, PSG, Milan over 3. This match is going to soar over 3. City versus over 3.5 with young boys. City at home, they're going to probably do the same exact thing they just did against Bournemouth, 6-1, 5-1, 4-1, something like that, especially because young boys kind of kept it close against them at the reverse fixture. You got Barca 1.5 against Shakhtar. I think this is going to be like a 3-0 game anyways. And then Haken Molde over 3. I think there was like 7 or 8 games in the reverse fixture or goals, excuse me. So I think 3 is a pretty easy number. And then last but not least, which will be the bonus bet, over 3 Atletico Madrid Celtic. I think this will be like a 4-1 kind of game. So no sweat there. And thank you for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you, like Matt said, like, subscribe, download, rate the podcast to help us spread our brand. Please interact with us on our Twitter at Fulltime Roundup. Follow Matt Gaslin on Twitter and harass him about Independence and Chelsea at Life of Gaslin. And you can always talk shit to me about Liverpool's draw at Lewin at Liverpool CLTFC. We will see you guys Thursday.